Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian. He never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach out and steal the election from a well-oiled machine headed by John Podesta is impressive.
And actually, this is our 50th episode.
Yeah, time flies.
I know, and I'm sorry, I didn't have anything prepared. I was up in the high country of Flagstaff this weekend with family.
Oh yeah, I saw that with the flag.
That brought the flags out, the official flag of Macedonia and the Star of Kutlish flag.
Yeah. You're allowed to do that in the States?
I'm allowed to do it wherever I damn well please. So,
not many Greeks up in Flagstaff, right?
I don't know, actually. There's a lot of Chinese students up there going to the school there, but the Chinese students go to every university now in the United States.
Well, then best don't use the new flag because they're going to think it's the Japanese war flag.
All right. Well, I don't have anything prepared, but I suppose we should do a podcast.
Yep. Even round number.
Even round number. This is episode number 50 of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. My name is Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin calling in from Skopje, Republic of Macedonia, braving machine gun attacks by mafia and earthquakes most recently.
So what's going on with well, first of all, let's take the shootout. Again, I've been traveling, so I've just had a chance to briefly catch up on some news. So the shooting at the Ali Pali, as we used to call it when I lived there, the Aleksandar Palace Hotel, which was, I like to point out, it was completed just before the outbreak of the 1999 NATO's defensive bombing of Yugoslavia. And it was full of, they probably paid off the construction costs, mortgage, whatever, because it was full to the gills. I remember being there many times doing, I was with Mercy Corps at the time, the humanitarian group, and I was the public information officer, doing all kinds of interviews and whatnot in there, but it was stuffed to the gills. I remember reporters from all over the world were literally, I think, sleeping in the hallways because they didn't have enough rooms.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there was a shooting there this weekend. What was that all about?
It was the one big hotel we had before Mialkov built the Marriott, and now Azaev-linked guy built a Hilton, and it's been declining a bit. It was built by this huge smuggler, the guy who literally had the biggest forwarding company at the time and made millions.
Fershped?
Fershped, yeah, Shteryo Rakov, during the embargo with Greece and Serbia.
Yeah.
You still get a bunch of SDSM people, the rich and the powerful, playing tennis there and whatnot, and apparently there were some drug dealers from the best we could hear now is that there was one group from Grčac, which is on the west side of Skopje, and another from Aračinovo on the east side. These are both Albanian villages, and these two groups were feuding over the drug business. And one of the groups came with machine guns, entered the hotel, lied to the people that they're police, shouted, "Police, get down," and then started shooting with machine guns at the other group. And then there was an actual policeman with the first group, apparently their friend or whatever, who pulled out a gun and started shooting at the machine gun armed attackers. Nobody wounded ultimately, or that's what we're told. Yeah, there are nice pictures of gunshots, holes in the glass doors of the Aleksandar Palace. Aračinovo group fled, burned the car, or just discarded it in Aračinovo, obviously. Nobody got arrested. And as I predicted in the morning that there's going to be pictures as soon as we know the identities of the attackers or those attacked. Some of them is going to have a picture with Zoran Zaev, which is the inevitable iron law of Macedonian politics, that whenever there is a mafia person, especially an Albanian one, they have a picture with Zoran Zaev from one of his campaigns rounding up the Albanian vote.
Right.
And I was close, but no cigar. They don't have pictures with Zaev, but they have a picture with Pendarovsky. So, yeah,
Okay.
pretty close on my part.
Yeah. Wow.
When
Okay.
from the Pendarovsky's elections earlier this year, obviously both sides voted for Steva, as literally all Albanians did in Macedonia.
Right. Okay. So that's the big news from this weekend over in Macedonia. But there's been a lot of other things going on. In addition, you mentioned the earthquake that we should just highlight for listeners. Literally the earthquake in Albania that occurred earlier this past week. We're recording this on. Let's see. Today is Sunday. It's December the 1st. Wow. So last month of the year, and this will drop tomorrow on Monday, December 2. We have Christmas, New Year's, then Christmas and New Year's coming up in that order.
Black Friday, worst of all.
Black Friday, we'll get to that later. Don't make me. I want to start off on a good note. The earthquakes in Albania, I think they were centered near Durrës. I don't know how many people were actually killed.
About 50 by now.
Very, very sad. And I know that Macedonia sent a number of people over there a number of rescue teams to help. Some aid is proper. Give credit where it's due. I know that I saw that our friend Vlatko Djorchev happened to be there at the same time as the earthquakes and was helping out. Good for him. We want to. It's an earthquake is Macedonia, and Macedonians know all too well. Earthquakes are prevalent in the region. They kill. The July 1963 earthquake in Skopje, which killed over 1,000 people. So this is not something to use as a political tool in any way, shape, or form. And it's good to see Macedonians help their neighbors in Albania, and even good to see Macedonians send their thoughts and their prayers to the citizens of Albania. Unfortunately, some of our friends in the Colorful Revolutionary group think that sending prayers to people is no good, doesn't do any good, and which is unfortunate.
Why they do that.
Well, they do it because they're petty. Number one, I think most of our colorful revolutionary friends are filled and racked with personal pain, anger, angst, a lot of confusion. Majority of them are atheists or agnostics. Some of them are actually militant atheists. I mean, I have atheist friends, and that's fine. They all happen to be on the right side of the political spectrum. So they understand and they respect the place and the part that religion plays in the life of a people and in culture, and the institutions that are represented by the church and other faith institutions that are very important to any culture, any people, and any nation. But some of our colorful revolutionary friends, the one we're talking about, whose name shall not be mentioned, she derided the fact that people were sending their thoughts and their prayers to the people of Albania. It's because she's petty, and she's one of the militant atheists who believes that religion should be eradicated, which is unfortunate. But anyway,
if you're not linked to some spiritual bond, what's the point of rushing there and trying to salvage those people? Anyway, if we are just like slightly more evolved monkeys on a planet rotating through nothingness, and we're gonna die any second in cosmical terms anyway, whether it's 1 second sooner or later. I mean, what's the point?
This is perfect. This is something that our friend Dennis Prager makes, the radio host, Orthodox Jewish popular radio host in America, does videos and blogs and things like that, a number of books, and he has this wonderful book about happiness. But in it, he talks about the idea that if you really believe that you're just a accident of cosmic proportions, if your family, those closest to you, those that you love, are just accidents, that this whole world, that everything is an accident that just came about happenstance, well then, from a logical perspective, there's literally no meaning. A purposeless universe and earth and people that just came about as an accident literally have no meaning. Now, you can create some sort of meaning to give yourself some sort of comfort, to help yourself from going absolutely, completely insane. You would need that, otherwise you would go insane, because logically it doesn't make any sense to claim that there's meaning to your own life or meaning to this world if you're just an accident cosmic happenstance. Those of us who do believe in God and in His Son Jesus Christ, we do believe that there is meaning to life. And frankly, Cvetin, you and I didn't talk about what we were going to talk about on this podcast, but as we enter December, as we enter the Christmas season, it kind of makes sense to to touch upon these things. And December, as we celebrate Christmas here, Macedonian Orthodox begin celebrating in December, but Christmas, of course, there is in January, not too far away. Yep. It really focuses our attention on what's the whole point of life. The three great questions that people throughout all of time, no matter what country or culture they're a part of, what faith they're a part of, doesn't matter, or no faith, is why am I here? Why are we here? What are we doing here? Where are we supposed to be going? How did we get here? And our friends, atheist friends, including those on the right side of the spectrum, have to have a struggle, I'm sure, with these questions. That this is all a cosmic happenstance, but again, there can't be meaning. But as we get closer to Christmas, as we think about the coming of the new year, I think it helps to focus our attention on, for those of us who are believers, why we were created, and we were created with a purpose and have a purpose. Anyway.
And as they say, there is no atheist in a foxhole, and I can tell you when, fortunately we haven't had a foxhole, here in a few decades, but not that long ago, but for most of the people, they haven't seen a foxhole. But I gotta tell you, I'm one of those tall buildings in Skopje, and they're designed to go back and forth when there's an earthquake. I don't know who had the bright idea that that's the way to do it, but apparently this absorbs, or I don't know, distributes the tension somehow. And I can tell you, it's absolutely not a pleasant experience, and I'm sure that many atheists who experienced the earthquake in my floor level, they were pretty, they were converted for at least a few seconds.
Yeah, when I lived, actually, I grew up in. I didn't grow up. I spent a few years growing up in California as a kid, and of course, California is in Southern California. It's earthquake prone. We didn't have any earthquakes, and I lived there. At least I remembered. But when I literally within the first month of moving to Skopje in 1996, I experienced my first earthquake, and then I experienced several more through the years while living there. And it's not a it's unnerving. It's frightening, and I can only imagine. So we pray for the people of Albania, and for those that for the first responders. Always, first responders are heroes, no matter what country, and, no matter what circumstance of trying to get the injured out of there. And of course, there's going to be a lot of recovery going on there, and we don't wish an earthquake upon anyone. But okay, so let's. What else did we got going on? Again, I haven't really checked all the news that's been going on since last week, and there's always so much. We just had, Thanksgiving week here, so it's a bit slow. But Macedonia, things never seem to slow down there. They will later this month. They will certainly next month. So, all right. So let's tell you what. Let's do this. Let's review the timeline. Today again is December 1. This drops on December 2. January 3. Zoran Zaev, who's and I love saying this, the outgoing prime minister, will resign. Oliver Spasovsky, the current interior minister, will become the interim prime minister. Vumero Dopamine will appoint their own, or they will appoint a member of the party to be the interior minister. There's a number of other positions, social welfare and labor, I think. Elections are the 12th of April. Parliament dissolves sometime in February, I believe.
Yep.
So basically, February 11th, yeah. In the meantime, also, this week, the NATO heads of state gather in Londinium to, not for a summit, but for the 70th anniversary of NATO, I believe. I think Macedonia will be there as a invited guest, or soon to be a member. They have a special term for it. But Macedonia is still not a member of NATO. The last country that we're waiting upon is Spain. Spain doesn't have a government, but they're trying to form one. Once they finally do form a government, then they will have to consider ratifying the accession protocols. That'll happen sometime in 2020. Then Macedonia has to ratify those as well. And then finally, Macedonia will be a member of NATO sometime in 2020, probably by June at least.
Be still, my beating heart. I couldn't be more blasé about this than
Well, NATO's
anything else.
ever since the demise of the Soviet Union on Christmas Day, 1991, I believe it was, NATO has been in search of a cause. Its raison d'être, reason for existence, was to fight the Soviet Union. And so once the Soviet Union ceased to exist, which was almost 30 years ago, had to come up with something else. Then it decided to go AOR, as they say, out of area, and fought a very defensive war against Yugoslavia in 1999. Actually, the only time Article 5 is the section of the NATO treaty, actually it's the Washington Treaty is what it's actually called, that states that attack on one is attack against all. So that was invoked after the 9/11 attacks in the United States to fight a bunch of towel heads in caves in Afghanistan. And yet it still doesn't seem to know what it's doing. Our friend Luke Coffey over at Heritage has argued that it needs to really get back to basics.
Yeah, but the basics are, again, I'd rather say it's not there to fight the Soviet Union, but to fight communism. But at this point, it's led by a Norwegian communist who was himself a KGB agent, Stoltenberg. Many of its countries are, on the far end of socialism themselves, or at least at times were. Even the United States had its episode of 8 years, and now we'll see how next year's elections go. In our case, it was literally active, did its part to promote the spread of a leftist government, of radical leftism in Macedonia, not only to bring the Socialist Party in power, but through the name change, we see all these elements of year zero, post-national, post-religious approach post-modern approach to nation states. So it's not only technically or nominally renaming us and just doing a technical process to get us to get over the Greek objection and get us into NATO, but it's actually structurally deconstructing our nation state.
Yes.
And on the other hand, Russia is an enemy, but it's more in some segments. Obviously, it's run by a secret service, secret police apparatus, strict control, especially over the opposition, which is being broken up every now and then to ensure that there is nobody sane who could challenge Putin for power, etc. But it's not a communist country.
Right.
In some regards, it's actually more grounded, more. I hate how they appropriate the words conservatism or right wing in Russia, but in some respects, in the economics, for example, they are to the right of many NATO member states, and it's very difficult for me, especially as a Slavic-speaking Orthodox Christian person, to continue seeing, having the same virulent reaction to Russia and, justify NATO going out of its way to fight it, since it's no longer an ideological opponent. I was very much on board with the, Middle Eastern wars. I would love to see a Venezuelan intervention or a North Korean intervention on humanitarian but also ideological grounds. But, fighting Russia, I don't know.
Right. No,
I don't really see it.
You make a good point about Russia, and this is something we've talked about before, and we'll talk about again. Of course, it's not a communist country, as you say; it's authoritarian. The true communist country, of course, is the People's Republic of China. Staunchly communist, and a group of leaders who think not 18 months in advance, like the West thinks, but 500 years in advance. That's the true enemy. And frankly, there are things that we should cooperate with Russia on in areas that we can cooperate, and that's why it's important to maintain good relations as best as possible.
Sure.
But yes, and going back to your point about conservatism, of course, to be a conservative in Russia and to be a conservative in the United States
Yeah,
can mean two different things. So,
exactly.
but you know, the root of conservative philosophy, conservative thought, which has its, you know, its origins, although they didn't create it in the Scottish Revolution. Adam Smith and Edmund Burke.
Hmm.
Edmund Burke was not Scottish; he was Anglo-Irish, but certainly Adam Smith and Hume and others. And they didn't set out to create this philosophy of what we think of conservatism, but they just observed the events around them and then analyzed it and thought about it and gave it some structure, and that is what we think of as conservatism, which, frankly, you know what? We should do a whole podcast devoted to conservative thought at some point in the new year. I think we should do that.
That would be a listener grabber.
Well, and also to explain to especially some of our friends on the left why we are classical liberals, small L liberals, because I remember having this brief back and forth with who's the Brussels correspondent for the Macedonian Information Agency?
Tanya.
Yeah. She,
From
you know, I was
the
trying to explain to her that liberal, small L, means is you know, actually conservative, and she didn't quite understand it because she's young and hasn't been exposed to things like history or deep thoughts about, you know, foundational values, first principles, things of that nature. So anyway, yeah, I think we should do a podcast in the new year, just about
Trying to convert Tanya.
yeah, I know it's not possible. So
Jeez. No, she had the greatest tweet or series of tweets today. Apparently, the French ambassador is apparently meeting the Constitutional Court, and we'll get to the Constitutional Court in a minute, over the amnesties which are being proposed. And Tanya had a reaction such as, what are these diplomats, these ambassadors doing meeting the judiciary? They treat us as if we're a colony. And it's so clueless. It's so yeah. There's no point trying to I don't know to explain anything to
I've
her.
got to tell you
A person
something.
who was literally brought to power by the U.S., the British ambassadors here, by Mogherini, and you know, to a lesser extent NATO. So clueless that who she owes her position in Brussels to, and her mother, who was employed in the embassy, and her uncle, who keeps getting these contracts, most recently with Boki 13, who he betrayed on the eve of Boki being arrested, but he worked for him like until the few hours before Boki was arrested. And they're so clueless. Now that one of the ambassadors from the European Union is being critical of them for absolutely excellent reasons. He's being critical of Zaev, the French ambassador, and they're like, what, are we a colony here? Are they going to tell us what to do? Like, you wouldn't know. You asked for permission before going to the restroom from the ambassadors and from the diplomats. You lousy. Go ahead with what you were going to say.
No, it's very strange. So I have the weirdest dreams sometimes, and last night I had this dream, and I don't know if it was Jean-Claude Juncker, who is no longer in office. Today is the first day of Ursula von der Leyen, is the new president of the, let's see, she's president of the European Commission, I think. But I think it was Juncker or somebody else. I had the strangest dream that he let slip that Macedonia was a colony of the European Union.
Okay.
And I was going to write this whole article on it. And then and by the time I woke up, I forgot everything. But I do remember that. That's just weird. So.
Oh my God! Were you following his drinking habits, maybe?
No, and I will confess that I just had 2 shots of Jim Beam before I went to bed. So I don't know. That was just weird. And of course, yesterday I was hiking in the snow.
Well, you had to drink something there.
Well, yeah, up in the Flagstaff, we went on a day hike with my brother-in-law and his brother, and 6.5 miles. So what's that? 11 kilometers over 4 hours at 7,000 feet above sea level and 28 degrees. Yeah, and 2 feet of snow. So what's that? I don't know.
Well, no idea. Knee high.
Yeah, 50, 60 centimeters. It was not easy. So I was exhausted.
Yeah.
That's my point. So
I keep
anyway.
getting surprised that there is snow in Arizona.
Hey, you bet. Oh, we got lots of it. Actually, in the mountains here, out my window were covered in snow on Friday morning, but
Seriously?
it's gone. Oh yeah, not entirely,
Oh,
but
it's-
part way. So it'll come back. We have another
just-
storm coming in.
Barely have a little sprinkle here and there in the mountains yet. It's been a crazy,
Wow.
crazy autumn. And is it winter now? No, still
No,
not winter.
it's in a few
Technically,
weeks.
it's
So,
it's been crazy.
yeah.
But I mentioned the amnesties, and this
Yes.
is now the new big story.
Okay. Yes. Speak.
And a bunch of people who are being prosecuted by Katica Janeva and Vilma Ruskovska, they're appealing to the Constitutional Court, and the court is now in quick succession scheduling 2 votes on 2 challenges to the amnesties. And one of them is a challenge to the law which overturned Ivanov's amnesty in 2016, which covered everybody. Gruevski, Zaev, everybody around Gruevski. Katica was charged with some technical issue. Ali Ahmeti, Menduh Tac, everybody was charged. Shekerinska's husband. But, obviously the onus was on the Vemera people because Zaev knew even then that he would not be touched. He had the backing of the West, of the internationals. And Gruevski and people around him were the ones who were asking for the amnesty. And some of them are still in legal, or no, many of them are still in legal jeopardy, even though, the lust for getting them arrested has really dissipated a lot, seeing what Zaev is doing and how his actions are turning out. So basically, the challenge would bring us back Ivanov's amnesty, over which the Colored Revolution protested, burned down his office, etc. It would get, Gruevski could then return to the country the next day, and Yankulovska, Sasha Mialkov, a bunch of other people around Gruevski would be free to go. But interestingly, the 2 Ivanov appointees, Darko Kostadinovsky and Usman Kadriu, I think, what's his name, they didn't vote in favor of this. But the other members of the court, who are Dui appointed, Vemera appointed, SDSM appointed, they mostly voted in favor. So we have a situation where everybody's asking, looking suspiciously, what's the catch here? Vemera, this iteration of Vemera condemned the idea. Zaev also, but Zaev's condemnation of this move by the Constitutional Court rings much more hollow because, it would benefit mostly Vemera at this point. Katica Janeva withdrew the charges against Zaev, which, Ivanov pardoned him for the wiretapping and the coup, as it was called. He was released by pliant judges from the other major challenge, the one where he was recorded asking for a huge bribe from a businessman in his hometown. But so at this point, it would initially help Vemera, or the older guard of Vemera, a lot. But then, given that Zaev has the president, Pendarovsky, who is unlikely to be pardoning Vemera people in the future, but then it would it could help Zaev a lot in the future, because it would make the pardons ironclad again. The EU could protest, and the US, and they could say, well, you, Zaev, are now asking for a pardon from Pendarovsky, or Katica Janeva will ask for a pardon from Pendarovsky. But once you received it, you should denounce it like Gruevski did in 2016, and Mialkov and Yankulovska. So you give this back and you go to prison, because this is a condition if you're going to joining the EU. This could very likely happen in a short period of time. Katica is going to trial anyway in a few days. But then they could just say, well, listen, Pendarovsky did this on his own, blame him. I cannot legally ask for this to be revoked anymore. So basically, Zaev could get a third pardon from a third president in a row, from Pendarovsky after being pardoned by Ivanov and Cervenkovsky, and could, it could help him immensely. And the other case before the court is a challenge by Mitko Chavkov, the former interior minister, who was sentenced, these exceptionally long prison sentences for the Vemera activist supporters who stormed into parliament when SDSM and Dui were grabbing power, breaking the filibuster. Chavkov was also sentenced. He refused amnesty, so did Yana Chenta, etc. But and they're now challenging the amnesty law, which was used to get several VMRO members of parliament to vote for the name change, who were also charged with terrorism over this incident. So they were released in exchange for their votes. And now the other people who are in prison, about 20 of them, they are now challenging the law, demanding that the law applies to everybody, not just to the VMRO members of parliament who voted with Zaev. And this could release Mitko Chavkov out of prison. This could release Jana Chinto, the great-grandson of Metodi Andonov-Chinto, the first Macedonian president.
Right.
It could release a few police officers, officials who were charged along with Chavkov, and more than a dozen of VMRO activists who joined in the protests, and some of whom, punched Zaev, pulled, Shekerinska by her hair in the whole commotion that happened, etc. And attacked, obviously, Ziadin Sela, who was the only person who was actually hurt in the incident.
Right. Yes. And who's now is a huge antagonist of outgoing Prime Minister Zoran Zaev.
Yeah, that's
and
very
Dewey,
interesting.
Ali Ahmeti, his twin. You mentioned the judiciary and things like that. I think it's worth mentioning we were talking about the timeline earlier. The trial with Katica starts on the 3rd of December, so Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
What do we know? What do we expect about that, if anything?
I mean, listen, she's guilty as sin. We're just looking into what kind of deal has she tried to make with Zaev so far, and the judges,
right.
To be quiet, to stop, to say that the buck stops with her, and possibly Frosina Reminskin doesn't go much.
You mean the euro?
Above her, the euros. And we'll see if this deal has been cut and in what form, whether there will be recriminations between Janeva and Boki 13, whether VMRO offers them a law, an amnesty or something in the future parliament, provided that they, do what every person who is in their position does, which is they're not the prime culprits here. They did a lot of horrible things, extorting money, abusing the very misplaced trust of the public in them, that they will restore justice and rule of law in the country, but they're obviously not the main people who are doing this. It's obviously Zaev, and if they point to Zaev, they should be let go. And insanity plea is also not out of the option and out of consideration, and it will go really well with.
You don't have an insanity plea, do you?
Yeah, I'm sure there's something like
okay.
limited mental capacity to be tried, to be put to trial.
Well, then why was she the special prosecutor in the first place?
I mean, it was obvious to anybody ever since that cringy video where she was trying to read answers from a sheet pre-prepared by the U.S. Embassy or her minders, and she failed. She was trying to read what's prepared to her, and she can't even do that. And we all realized it's really a mockery of a sham. But then she's got additional charges on top of this. Now IRI has prepared something like a tool which it's actually pretty totalitarian even. It really goes into fine detail of who employed in which institution received how much money. Mm-hmm. It's really weird. It's creeping me out a little bit. I mean, I'm all for turning the screws on the public administration, but this really goes to this person working there. He has been paid this much. This is his salary. It's really a bit over the top. And obviously, initially, everybody is having fun with going after Janeva's, the people she hired, all SDSM supporters, now some of them in the police, in the financial police, some obscene bonuses being awarded left and right. And we were told to look this way because just like a few days later, ostensibly driven by this public outrage, in fact, in a very engineered move, this prosecutor who is going after Janeva, Vilma Ruskovska, she raided the special prosecutor's office, seizing documents over this allegation that the institution was not only extorting money from people, but was actually also the money it got from the budget, it was being divided illegally, and now additional charges may be dropped against Janeva. It might be that her negotiations with Zaev are not going well, and this is another tool of pressure on her. It also might be that, at some point Ruskovska will turn on Zaev and that they're trying to, to sink Katisanova, to pressure her until she turns on Zaev and, does the natural thing and says, this guy knew everything and he was in the know from the start and he is the real organizer of the whole mess. So she might be working for other circles within SDSM who might want to do away with Zaev and Shekerinsk. So we have judges and prosecutors fighting each other, and IRI gave them an additional stick to hit themselves on the heads with.
Wow. Well, again, we've said this many times in the past on this podcast and in our reporting and writings and things like that. We'll say it many times more in the future, that the revolution always devours its own. Citizen is riven with divisions within itself. There's divisions between Citizen and Dewey, their junior partner. And, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And so with the upcoming elections, we'll see. The question isn't, whether or not they will fail, but how badly they will fail by. So, and what happens to Dewey? Because Dewey, as a Macedonian Albanian political party, has been around quite a long time. Of course, all of the Macedonian Albanian parties are cult of personality parties. They don't have an ideology other than what can you give our constituents. And when the leader dies, the party dies. We saw that, everybody. Look, I've forgotten more than most outsiders will ever know about Macedonia, and so I remember Emir Miri of BDP, who I think got 1,000 votes in the last parliamentary elections in 2016, but he was one of the signers of the so-called Ohrid Framework Agreement in 2003. 2001, sorry. See, I've forgotten. I've forgotten what I forgot. But Arben Jafari, when he passed away, Menduthaci is the head of DPA, but they're nothing. So, and Ali Ahmeti, who is in ill health, once he goes, then the party will go. But anyway, let's bring it back, Cvetin, since we mentioned at the top of this podcast that this is 50, number 50, and we started this. So we started this in late 2018, maybe the end of November, beginning of December, and we started it in response to the fact that Zoran Zaev and his government, once they had finally taken power after being installed at in the middle of 2017, started working with gusto to try and change the name of Macedonia, and not just the name, but the very character of Macedonia. I think a few minutes ago you mentioned year zero, which of course is a reference. I think you were making the reference to the French Revolution, that wanted to tear down all of the institutions of the king and parliament and faith institutions, the Catholic Church and everything else in France, and start from year zero. Brand new everything. And this, of course, goes to what we talked about earlier about having a podcast based totally on the idea of what it means to be a conservative or a classical liberal. The institutions are vital to the continuation of the state and the people. And this is something that Zoran Zaev was installed to do and wanted to do, frankly. Actually, I don't know if he wanted to do it. He knew that the bargain with the devil was that he gets to become prime minister. They help him become prime minister if he tears down Macedonia and the institutions that have made Macedonia and Macedonians what they are today. And so we started this podcast right after the failed referendum of September 2018, which, while consultative in nature, was a clear signal from the people that, yeah, sure, we want to join NATO and the EU, but we don't want to do it at the price of changing our name, our identity, our heritage, our culture, our history, our faith, our language, and everything else. So that's why we started it. And yet, today, even as we move forward, even as these scandals swirl about Zoran Zaev and his people and whatnot, he still insists on doing everything he can to promote his project, to the extent of not even using the adjective Macedonian anymore. I see that he just got a new award, I don't know, I got to look this up and figure out what this is, the Isabeg Iskovojic, say it, Iskovojic International Award?
I have no idea what his last name is. He's the founder of Sarajevo. He's the Turkish bey who built the city in the middle.
Okay.
ages.
So Zaev gets this award for foreign leaders that quote unquote promote peace, tolerance, and understanding unquote. Which I don't think Zoran Zaev has done any of those. It's the opposite. And yet he won't talk about the Macedonians. He talks about the multi-ethnic society that is Macedonia, but my point being, he continues to work towards tearing down the idea of a Macedonian people and a Macedonian history and a Macedonian identity and everything that goes with it and everything that makes Macedonia and the Macedonians unique in our world today. Even as his world collapses around him, even as his friends abandon him, his domestic friends and his international friends, and he's committed to this lunacy of his. I don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, when you say what it looks like when they're undermining Macedonia as a Macedonian state, a nation state, and you mentioned Dewey, what are they going to do now before the elections? And we saw what they're going to do. I mean, there was this incident, essentially, where a Dewey official, Artan Grubi, very close to Ali Ahmeti, in essence, he's a football hooligan. This is how he started his career. Much loved by the diplomatic corps here for some reason. And he brings several hundred of his people from a nationalist group of football fans of the Skopje team from Skopje. And they're called Šverceri, the smugglers, is the translation. They killed a Macedonian Vardar supporter like barely 2 years ago, not even 2 years ago, in a show of force, essentially. And now they book the Macedonian National Theatre, which was built in the 30s, destroyed by the earthquake, rebuilt by Gruevski, one of the ultimate buildings of Skopje 2014. It's not like a place of Macedonian national identity, like maybe the Vomera Museum next door or a church would be, but it's obviously a huge landmark of Skopje, and the message they wanted to send was unmistakable. They bring like several hundred goons and hooligans inside the theater, and they're shouting, they're doing what football fans normally do at the stadium. They're slashing at the chairs and jumping up and down the stiles and whatever. They're doing all sorts of damage, singing Albanian nationalist songs. So, this is how wars start in the Balkans, by football hooligans provoking, clashing each other. And this is what Dewey is going to do. They're going to ramp up nationalism even further. And this is what they can offer. I mean, and Zaev is like smirking, smiling. Well, yeah, I was at the first. Zaev actually attended the event, but he says, I was at the first portion of the event, which was meant to celebrate the Albanian alphabet or some other stupidness, and pretend holiday for Albanians to celebrate in Macedonia. And they actually want to celebrate the Day of Albanian Flag, the Day of Albanian Declaration of Independence, which is close to this other holiday. But he says, well, I was at the first portion of the celebration. It was orderly, haha. The second portion was haha, not as orderly. Like, get out of here. They're pissing in his face. They're giving us the message that they run the city now. And this is what it looks like. This is what in the Balkans it looks like once you give up your nation state. This is going to continue until we get to a point of confrontation.
Right. Yeah, Cvetin, you're absolutely right. He's done all this. Zoran Zaev has done all this damage to Macedonia. He still expects that he's going to be rewarded for it when he doesn't. He's not smart enough, maybe, I guess is the right word, to understand that having done their bidding, he can now be dismissed. And that's exactly what's going to happen to him. He's going to be dismissed by the Macedonian people. He's going to be dismissed by the internationals whose support he relied on to get to this position. Now, I think we're running a little bit long because we still have our farmers' picks to do here, and so I want to, before we go to our farmers' picks, I do want to end on a note of hope, and that is that the so-called Prespa agreement is worth the paper it's written on. All international agreements are worth the paper they're written on. They can be undone. It will be undone. It'll take hard work, perseverance, wisdom, but it will be undone because it has to be undone. Actually, that should be a slogan. It will be undone because it must be undone. For the very survival of Macedonia and the Macedonian people. And I know it can be undone. Let's see. Wait, let me read that. I'm just thinking that it will be undone because it must be undone and it can be undone, or something like that. I'll have to refine this and I'll bring that back on our next podcast. But why don't we...
We'll work on this.
Yes, exactly, yeah. why don't we take a break now and come back with our farmers picks? And welcome back to the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. Cvetin and Jason talking about all things Macedonian on this first day of December 2019. It is now time for... We've had a bit of a rambling podcast. This is our 50th podcast. I didn't have time to prepare, sorry, because I was traveling with family this Thanksgiving weekend. But I think it's been a very good podcast. But now it's time for our farmers picks. Cvetin, what's your farmers pick?
Well, actually, I don't have it yet. I will have it. At least I hope I'll have it soon.
Okay, yeah.
There is a very interesting. You remember how Zaev got pranked by these Russians a few months ago?
Yeah, Adam Schiff gets pranked by him too.
Yeah, they do it to everybody. So now they or somebody else apparently pranked Zaev again, and this time there was Zaev's. Deputy, PR guy, Zabrčanec, he announced that Zaev was called up by somebody pretending to be Greta Thunberg, I guess some Swedish-sounding girl, and that he had a conversation with her. Now they're saying that Zaev played along because he's once bitten, twice shy, so he's now in the loop, so he led her on in order to discover as much information as possible. I really don't buy this. I'm pretty sure that somebody had a good gag with him again, but it's the tape is not out yet. I'm not sure if it will be. But then I noticed that on Greta's Instagram, she announced recently, like a month ago, that somebody informed her that somebody's calling politicians or people around the world and pretending to be Greta. So I'm sensing that this is there is something to this. So we are all now eagerly anticipating my next farmer's pick, which is going to be Zaev talking to these two unfortunately unsuccessful Nobel Prize nominees discussing world politics and climate change, and this is going to be marvelous.
Well, that's delicious.
Yeah, so this is going to be my farmer's pick once it's out. Hopefully, I'm praying it's out as soon as possible.
Well, that's great. So and a preview of farmer's picks. So.
Yeah, on your end, I've noticed you've been you had the flags of Macedonia and the Republic of Macedonia on your hike in Flagstaff. So now is this, and you've done it a bunch of times before around Arizona, around the United States. What's the next exploit?
Yes, I don't know what the next exploit is, but this is my farmer's picks. It's not. I don't want to make it self-serving, but I do a lot of hiking around Arizona and some of my other travels this past summer with some Macedonian friends when we went up to Grand Canyon, Meteor Crater, Pacific Ocean, things like that. I like taking the flag of the Republic of Macedonia and Macedonia's first flag, the Star of Kutlish, and just displaying them with these great geographical landmarks. And I put it on Twitter, I put it on Facebook. I think we can link to the Twitter one. But I do this for a reason. I do this to encourage Macedonians wherever they are, and to encourage Macedonia, and to show the world that I'm trying to be an ambassador in a small way for Macedonia and Macedonians by taking these two symbols of Macedonia around the great state of Arizona or other places with me, and just showing it and just trying to be an encouragement. And that's the reason I do these things. So, Cvetin, that is my farmer's pick for this week.
Yeah, it annoys the Greeks for sure, that I can tell you.
Well, you know what? I don't do it to annoy the Greeks or the Bulgarians or anybody else. I do it to encourage the Macedonians. If it annoys them, that's their problem.
That's just the added bonus.
Yeah, but that's their problem. So anyway, this has been episode number 50 of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. A bit rambling again, but I think we covered some interesting ground. Always.
You won't hear this stuff anywhere else.
That's for sure. So always great talking to you, Cvetin.
You too, buddy. Take care.
Thanks.